When you think of world building, you probably imagine sweeping landscapes, imposing skylines, or even a whole new universe filled with its own set of regions, cultures, and rules. For any sci-fi or fantasy epic, world building is one of the first, most pivotal steps in crafting your story. But lost in that is one simple fact. Every work of fiction has to have world building. Whether it takes place in a galaxy far, far away or right here in modern society, world building is what gives a story its sense of place. Not physical location or setting, but the space the story itself occupies. In order to draw you in, the world has to be convincing. You have to feel what it's like to be there. The world needs to be alive outside the plot. That could mean creating entirely new cultures complete with their own set of conflicts, which may not even be a part of the main narrative. It could also mean allowing the viewer to relate to a character through simple actions in their daily grind. A work's world is the entry point to the story. It should exist both within and outside the main narrative. World building essentially boils down to the delivery of information. What type of people inhabit this world? What mechanics govern it? What is it like to actually live there, etc. You have to know what it's like to be in the world to dive into it. Just as important as the information itself, however, is the way in which it's conveyed. I don't want a story to explain its world to me. I want to be shown. This is why nobody likes info dumping. It's boring. The information may be interesting, but simply telling it to the audience with little or no action isn't. Giant chunks of exposition can take the viewer out of the story's flow, making it much easier for some of that information to get lost. Show, don't tell. Info dumping is especially bad in a visual medium where there's always something to look at. Anime has the luxury of limitless possibilities to what you can put on screen, so shots of characters sitting around while they explain away the story are insanely boring and a massive missed opportunity. It's not simply the major features relevant to the plot that make a world interesting, though. Sure, Psycho-Pass's Sybil system is philosophically fascinating, and FMA's alchemy makes for an insanely cool concept, but these are just one part of creating a world. Flip Flappers has been one of my favorite series of the fall 2016 season, in part because of its unique ability to create so many interesting worlds in such a short amount of time. Each new venture is a visual treat that uses the characters' interactions with the environment, as well as beautiful backgrounds and wide shots to convey its feeling. That's the nature of world building. I should feel what it's like to be there. Much of the talk on world building centers on big details leaving big impacts, but I want to focus on the smaller details leaving small impacts, because taken together, it's these details that make a world come alive. If a story takes place in modern-day Tokyo, it should look, feel, and act like modern-day Tokyo. Do the background characters wander aimlessly, or do they have some sense of direction? What do the characters eat? When do they sleep? What are they doing when they're not on screen? What's the environment like? Shinsekai Yori, or From the New World, is one of anime's better examples of world building to me, and I say that readily admitting it's not without faults. The 4th episode, for example, is one giant info dump which drives the story to a grinding halt, but where it succeeds is creating a world that truly feels living. A critical component to world building is mood. How does the world make you feel? Anime, unlike textual media, doesn't have to rely purely on words to construct its world. It has visuals and sound. Shinsekai Yori crafts a haunting yet serene atmosphere through its chilling vocal soundtrack and simplistic animation using silhouettes and sharp monochrome. It felt truly alien to me, a feeling made even more unsettling with the knowledge that this is indeed a future Earth. That mood drew me into the world from the start and thankfully kept me from dropping the series after the plot began to drag in its first arc. The show's world only expands from there as you're thrust into its rich history and diverse cultures. Shinsekai Yori captures the essence of dystopias laid forth by Orwell and Huxley. If you're going to write a story set in a far future where people have some power or technology has advanced beyond compare, you have to account for how such changes would profoundly affect society and social order. Dystopian worlds originate from those adaptations, and Shinsekai Yori is at its best when it gives you a sense of what it's like to live in this new world. First impressions are arguably more important to the world than any other aspect of a story, because unlike the themes, major conflicts, and even characters to some extent, the world needs comparably less time to really draw you in. More often than not, it's the first thing you're really introduced to. Take Gurren Lagann, for example. The claustrophobic, dirty feeling of Simon and Kamina's underground home really comes through thanks to tight framing, little lighting, and a blue hue. When they finally break through to the surface, the relief of the fresh air feels like a huge weight lifted off your shoulders, and the beauty of the open sky is made striking by its color, symmetry, and size. Consider how barren and empty the surface really is here. It's made to captivate us in the same way it has the characters. It's the perfect episode for the start of their journey, and a great hook into the world. As I've said though, world building isn't reserved for these grand adventures. Even if it takes place in a setting you're entirely familiar with, like 2000s Japan, you may know the world, but you don't know the world of the characters. It's still the story's job to relate the feeling of being in this specific section of modern day society. All those earlier questions still apply. But if there aren't any new cultures to divulge, new environments to explore, or new laws to explain, then what does the story have left to establish? It all goes back to the central question of world building. What is it like to be there? Say I'm some background character. How do I feel? What am I doing? What am I seeing? It's these smaller details which answer that question. Let's take a look at a different fall 2016 show, Sound Euphonium. One of the series' strengths is conveying its characters' emotions, thoughts, and feelings through careful framing, expressions, and visual techniques. The shaky camera, for example, is often used to convey rising emotion, say in an argument. At others, it's to give the series a documentary feel. Both cases reveal information about the sentiment of the room. Yamato loves to use bokeh to control focus and add a layer of beauty to a shot, again offering a glimpse into the sense of that moment. The first sequence of Season 2 uses a sharp contrast between environments to portray time and emotion as it shifts from a winter air to the heat of summer. The show takes Kumiko looking up at the same sky with a similar expression and elicits two very different feelings out of it by playing them back to back. If a story takes place in a real-life setting, it should match that real-life setting. Sound Euphonium takes place in Uji, Kyoto, so there are several nods to real events in the city, such as the Uji Fireworks Festival, which actually hasn't run for several years, but author Ayano Takeda wanted to highlight it from her youth, or the alignment of Venus and Jupiter in episode 8 of Season 1, which happened in real life at that time too. It's not just there as a reference only people from Uji would understand either. It's framed in such a way to reflect the relationship between Kumiko and Reina at the time. Details like these may not seem like much on their own, but add them all up and it goes a long way towards making the world feel real. To see how detrimental bad world building can be to a story, look no further than Sword Art Online 2's first arc, Gun Gale Online. Few shows are as guilty of info dumps as SAO2 here in its first arc. By the time any action rolls around, the story's already bored me beyond repair. To make matters worse, the setting of these scenes is even more boring than the info dump. There's nothing less interesting than having characters sit around a table at a coffee shop and talk endlessly, so to do it over and over again is borderline sadistic. Much of our initial time spent there is inside dull buildings with no character to them, instead of engaged in its more captivating world. It's no coincidence the arc's only memorable sequences make use of these striking landscapes. Even then, it's mostly just there to be a gritty counterpart to SAO's lighter worlds. I think that's the problem most series run into. Their world has no personality, it's just the place where the story happens. It's a shame, really, because a great world can make the difference between a decent story and an engrossing one. Oftentimes I find myself rewatching my favorite series not because I need the narrative again. I know the plot, I've seen it. It's the world I come back to. So the next time you watch a show, no matter how big or small the story may seem, pay attention to the background, think about how a particular shot makes you feel, and see what information you can pull from outside the exposition. For world building isn't simply about giving a story a place to happen. It's about creating a world that's truly alive.